The sky over Yumiki was the kind that made you feel both small and seen. Endless, open, stretching above the huts and farms and timber sheds like an ancient witness. Under that sky, Ina walked home with hands rough from shaping wood and a heart heavy with longing. He was a carpenter, known across the region for crafting strong roofs and elegant cabinets. But respect in Yumiki did not come from what a man built with his hands, it came from what he fathered. After 4 years of marriage to Adan, there were no sons crying in the courtyard, no small footsteps running through the dust, only the whisper of prayers that had not yet been answered. At first, the village had patience. Miscarriages happen, they said. God has his time. But time stretched and thinned, and patience turned into gossip. When the second miscarriage nearly killed Adan, Ina's mother, Mama Ula, began saying things aloud, things she had once only whispered. "Some women carry bad luck in their wombs," she muttered while sweeping the yard, her voice carrying over the compound walls. At first, Ina defended his wife. He told his mother to hold her tongue, to let peace reign. But slowly, subtly, his gaze began to change. He no longer lingered by Adan's side after work. He no longer asked her how she felt. She became a presence rather than a partner. Adan felt it. She lay awake at night, her hands over her stomach, whispering to a God she no longer knew how to trust. "Let this one live," she begged. "Not for me, for him, for peace." When she realized she was pregnant again, she told no one but Ina. She moved like glass, careful, quiet. She avoided the market, avoided lifting buckets or sweeping too hard. She drank the nurse's recommended herbs, ate soft food, and prayed. By the 7th month, her belly was fuller than ever. The village nurse, Mama Enki, placed a hand on it and smiled. "Maybe it's twins," she said. "Maybe this is the one." When the 9th month arrived, labor came with the dawn. Her screams split the early silence and the compound stirred. It was a long delivery. Mama Enki's back ached from bending, her hands stained with effort. The first baby came out crying, lungs strong, heart determined. A girl. The second was quieter but breathing. Another girl. The third took longer. There was blood. Adan bit her lips till they bled. But in the end, the third girl emerged too tiny, squirming, alive. 3 daughters. 3 miracles. Adan lay on the mat, chest heaving, sweat soaking her wrapper, eyes wide with awe. "They are alive," she whispered. "That's all that matters." But outside the room, Ina stood stiff as stone. Mama Enki approached him, her voice warm. "You have 3 daughters, healthy. Your wife is strong. You should be proud." Ina blinked. "3?" he repeated. "3 girls?" "Yes," she confirmed. "All safe." He said nothing, just turned and walked away, jaw clenched. Inside, Adana waited, her arms cradling tiny bodies swaddled in cloth. She looked toward the doorway, expecting him to appear, to kneel beside her, to say anything. Instead, Mama Ula entered. She stood at the threshold like judgment itself, eyes scanning the babies without warmth. "So this is what you give us after all these years?" she said. 3 girls? You have cursed this family." "Mama, they are alive," Adan pleaded. "Please, they are your grandchildren." Mama Ula's lips curled. "They are not what this house needs." And she left. Hours passed. Adani waited. Finally, Ina entered. He did not smile. He did not kneel. He looked at the girls once and then at her. "You can't stay here," he said. She thought she misheard. "What? You can't stay? I have nothing after all these years but shame. 2 miscarriages and now 3 daughters. I'm finished." She sat up, weak, trembling. "They are your children," she said. "Are girls not gifts from God?" "Not to this house," he replied. "Take them and leave. Rest for a few days if you must, but be gone within the week." He left before her tears even fell. 3 days later, with her body still aching from birth, Adani wrapped her daughters in borrowed cloth and stepped out of the only home she'd known. The landlord's wife gave her a nylon bag. No one else helped. Her feet were swollen. Her back screamed. But she walked. The village was quiet that morning, eyes watching her from behind windows, pretending not to see. She didn't know where she was going, just away. Away from a love that had calcified into cruelty. Away from a mother-in-law who saw blessings as burdens. She walked toward Umai, the closest village with a clinic. Dust clung to her legs. One baby strapped to her back whimpered. The other 2 rested in her arms, mouths open in sleep. Every step was pain. Every breath was hope refusing to die. By late afternoon, she reached the edge of Umai's. She collapsed onto a bench beside a provision kiosk, legs shaking. The woman who owned the shop came out and stared. "Did you just deliver?" she asked. Adan nodded. 3? The woman asked again, surprised. Another nod. "Where are you going?" "I don't know." The woman didn't press. She went back inside. Adan stared at the sky, at the clouds that rolled like silent witnesses. A few minutes later, the woman returned with a bowl of pap and water. "Eat," she said. "You cannot breastfeed on an empty stomach." Adan thanked her, voice hoarse with gratitude. That night she slept in the corridor of the local clinic. The security guard didn't ask questions. She laid 2 wrappers on the floor and rested the babies on them. She sat beside them and watched. She named them the next morning. Chisum, the bold one who cried the loudest. Chinara, the quiet one who watched the world with ancient eyes. Chinyer, the tiniest, whose hands clung to her mother's finger as though refusing to let go of life. The village talked. A woman with triplets sleeping in the clinic. Some came to peek. Some dropped wrappers. A widow named Mama Amma offered her a room at the back of her house. It was small, with a leaking roof and no floor tiles, but it was home, and that was where the new life began. Adana washed clothes, she fetched water, she roasted groundnuts by the roadside. Every coin went to baby soap, to food, to cloth. She starved herself so the girls could eat. When they fell sick, she carried them to the same clinic where she first slept. The nurses liked her. One, Nurse Nia, began teaching her basic treatments. "You're smart," Nia said once. "If you'd gone to school, you'd have been a health worker." Adan smiled faintly. School was a luxury she never had. But she was learning how to survive, learning how to turn pain into strength. And the girls grew. The road was still long, but it had begun. By the time the triplets turned 3, the rhythm of their little home in Umai's had settled into a quiet, relentless beat. Chisum, the eldest by minutes, was already loud and fearless, quick to climb stools and shout greetings at strangers passing their compound. Chinara, more reserved, spent long hours observing people, imitating how the nurses at the clinic measured temperature or whispered to patients. Chinyeri, the smallest, had a stubborn streak that defied her size, often refusing to eat unless fed first or holding on to a plastic cup like it was royal treasure. Every morning, Adan tied one child to her back, held the other 2 by hand, and set out to work roasting groundnuts by the roadside or washing clothes in the yards of the wealthier families. Some days were good. She'd earn enough for rice and palm oil, even a tiny bar of soap. Other days were lean, and she'd drink water until her belly forgot it was hungry. But she never let her daughters go to bed without a meal. If she had to beg, she would. If she had to kneel, she'd do so silently, not for herself, but for them. The people of Umaz slowly changed how they looked at her. They still whispered 3 girls, no husband, too young to raise so many, but the whispers softened when they saw her work ethic. When the girls turned 5, Adan walked barefoot to the local primary school with her cloth wrapper tied tight and enrolled all 3. She had just enough money to buy 1 uniform set each, second-hand, and a few notebooks they would have to share. Chisholm carried the books in a small faded bag someone had gifted them. Chinara cleaned the uniforms every evening. Chinyeri, though often distracted, never failed to remember the route to school. On visitation days, other children were met by fathers carrying bread and juice. The triplets waited quietly with small smiles, holding each other's hands, until Adan would appear carrying nothing but boiled mangoes wrapped in old paper. The teachers watched. They understood. One day, after school, a teacher asked Chisholm where her father was. She simply answered, "We don't have one. We have Mummy." The teacher nodded and didn't ask again. By the time the girls turned 8, Adan had joined a local women's group and borrowed a small sum to buy a pan and oil. She began frying akara bean cakes by the roadside. The smell brought in customers from across the village. Her akara was soft inside, crispy on the outside, and sold out by noon most days. She used the profits to buy the girls a mattress to sleep on. No more sleeping on woven mats. The mattress was thin but a blessing. They slept peacefully. They stopped asking why other children had fathers. Adan still remembered everything, but she spoke little of the past. She never cursed Ina, never poisoned their minds. She only said, "Work hard, make something of yourselves, and don't let anyone treat you like you are nothing." The girls listened. In Yumiki, far away, Ina had remarried. His second wife, Nkem, was a schoolteacher. Within months, she was pregnant. Ina glowed with pride again, telling neighbors that his real life was finally beginning. When the child was born a boy, he named him Obiora. But Obiora was born weak. His lungs struggled. He coughed through his first night. He couldn't suckle properly. By the second week, Ina had sold his bicycle to buy medicine. By the 3rd month, he stopped taking work as regularly. All his time went to hospital runs. Nkem stopped being patient. She blamed the child's weakness on bad luck, blamed Ina for not having more money, blamed herself for marrying into an unlucky line. Arguments became routine. The house grew cold, and Ina, though he didn't say it aloud, began to think of the daughters he had once thrown away. Back in Umaz, Adan had added something new to her routine. Every evening after frying akara, she took leftover oil and beans and made a smaller batch, which she sold door to door. The extra money went into a wooden box under her mattress. It was school money, exam money, emergency money. When she counted it and found it lacking, she didn't cry aloud. She simply worked more. She cleaned houses on Sundays, fetched water for elderly women, ran errands for the local clinic. The triplets noticed. They began helping in small ways, folding wrappers, fetching water, even serving akara. They never complained. At 12, Chisholm began fixing things. First it was a broken radio, then a fan. She watched the roadside technicians and mimicked them. She would pick up discarded wires, broken plugs, and experiment behind their house. One day, she repaired their neighbor's kerosene stove. Word spread. People started bringing her spoiled items to try. She never charged, but they paid her with yam, soap, or coins. Chinara, always curious, began spending extra time at the clinic. Nurse Nia let her observe procedures. She started asking questions about medicine, infections, symptoms. She read her mother's old notebooks and borrowed textbooks from the head teacher's daughter. She said, "One day I will wear the white coat." Chinyere, though quieter, became obsessed with a broken school computer. She asked the teachers how it worked, stayed after class to watch them boot it. One afternoon, when the system crashed, she fixed it. No one knew how. She had taught herself. Adan watched, quietly proud. She wasn't one for big smiles, but her heart swelled each time a neighbor said, "These girls are sharp." The wooden box under the bed grew heavier. The girls never asked for new shoes or birthday gifts. They only asked for books. One morning, the school headmaster came to their home, sweating under the sun. He sat outside and cleared his throat. "Madam," he said, "your children are exceptional. They've been recommended for a scholarship exam by a big NGO from Lagos. It's a rare opportunity." Adan bowed her head. "I'm honored, sir, but the fee?" He raised a hand. "Let me speak with the officers. Maybe they'll help." She said little that day, but that night she stayed awake staring at the roof. She prayed silently. She didn't ask for miracles, just for enough strength to keep up. The following week, she sold 2 full buckets of akara, her best day ever. She took half the profit and slid it into the wooden box. The triplets studied hard. The house had no light, so they read by candle. When the candles ran out, they memorized aloud. Chisholm recited physics formulas out loud until the neighbors banged the wall in protest. Chinara copied out medical essays in ink, line by line. Chinyere taught herself typing using a small toy keyboard someone had once gifted them. On the day of the exam, Adani ironed their uniforms with a charcoal press, braided their hair, and walked them to the school gate. She held each of their shoulders and said, "You have already made me proud." 2 weeks later, the results came. All 3 passed ranked top 3 in the entire local government. The NGO approved their remaining secondary school tuition. If they kept up their performance, they'd get full university sponsorship. Umais celebrated. The woman who once slept in a clinic with triplets had raised stars. People spoke her name with respect. She didn't curse the man who left her, one neighbor said. She turned her pain into daughters who shine. But Adan didn't bask in glory. She just worked harder. She still rose at 4 a.m., still fried akara, still counted her coins at night. But now, a second-hand laptop had arrived, a gift from the NGO. The girls took turns using it. Chinyere taught herself HTML and JavaScript. Chinara downloaded health PDFs. Chisholm designed mechanical parts using online templates. They were teenagers, but their minds had already outgrown the village. Adan sometimes sat in the corner, watching them by candlelight. Her back ached, her fingers were cracked, but her heart, her heart beat like a drum of quiet triumph. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this: she had already won. At 17, the triplets were no longer just local stars, they were a quiet phenomenon. Chisholm, now taller than most boys in her school, carried herself with a confidence that came from fixing things others couldn't. She was the girl who wired the principal's faulty generator back to life after an electrician failed. Chinara had become the trusted first aid assistant at the clinic, diagnosing simple ailments faster than some of the older nurses. She never overstepped, but always asked the right questions, always took the initiative. Jiniere, whose fingers flew across her donated laptop, now designed web pages and mobile apps for small businesses in the village and the town beyond. She had created a small tool that tracked market prices for local women selling tomatoes and pepper, and word reached a small startup in Enugu who began giving her freelance work through email. At home, Dawn never said much. She cooked, cleaned, worked, and when night came, sat by the window watching the glow of the laptop on Chiniere's face, or listened to Chisholm explaining turban diagrams to herself, or heard Chinara read aloud from anatomy books. Every light in the house, every beat of those girls' ambitions, felt like repayment from the universe. And yet, Dan never allowed herself to grow too comfortable. She still kept her wooden savings box, still stretched coins, still prayed under her breath each night. The world had taught her not to trust ease. Meanwhile, in Yumiki, Ina's world unraveled faster than he could hold it together. Obiora's health deteriorated. The boy, now 10, was thin as a broomstick, his body too fragile for most foods, his breathing ragged during harmattan. The hospital visits had multiplied. Ina sold his last timber supplies, then his mattress, then the framed wedding photo he once proudly kept by the bed. His wife and Cam grew colder. She started staying in the city longer, only visiting on weekends, and even then with a tone sharper than ever. One evening, she shouted across the compound for all to hear, "This boy's problems are not ordinary, and I'm carrying this house on my back while you sit in shame." Ina said nothing. What was there to say? He had once thought 3 daughters were not enough. Now he would have given his right hand to see one of them again, to know where they were, to say he was sorry. But shame is a powerful wall, and pride is a heavy lock. He had neither the key nor the courage. When Obiora died one early morning, his body cold in his father's lap after another fruitless hospital trip, Ina didn't scream. He didn't even cry right away. He just sat, eyes unfocused, stroking the boy's limp hand. At the funeral, Nkem stood stiff and dry-eyed, leaving right after the final prayer. 2 weeks later, she packed what was left of her things and left the village for good. She told no one. Ina returned from fetching water and found a note. "I cannot do this anymore. I deserve better." For once, he agreed with someone. He did not even have the strength to be angry. Word spread fast. Ina, once the best carpenter in Yumiki, once the man with pride, now lived in a half-built compound on the village edge. He had no roof on one side of the structure, used plastic bags and mosquito nets to block the rain, and cooked with firewood in a rusted pot someone gave him. He ate once a day, sometimes less. Young men occasionally brought him leftover food or helped sweep the dust from his makeshift floor. He never asked for help, just nodded, accepted, and returned to silence. And in that silence his thoughts turned again and again to Adan and the girls. Did they grow up? Did they survive? Were they married off or thriving? Did they hate him? He no longer asked God for mercy. He simply asked to know. In Umais, the girls had blossomed into full women. Chisholm was in university studying mechanical engineering. She had already caught the attention of an international company scouting African talent in infrastructure design. Chinara, focused as ever, was 2 years into her medical degree, topping her class and shadowing doctors even on weekends. Chinieri had started earning real money. Her name now floated in freelance circles as a reliable, fast, and creative tech mind. The three didn't see each other every day anymore, but they texted every morning in a family group chat named Team Mummy First. They sent jokes, exam updates, screenshots of paychecks, and sometimes just one line: "I'm proud of us." Adan, still living in the same modest bungalow the NGO helped her build, had upgraded from her roadside Akara stand. With her daughter's help, she now ran a small provision store. Nothing fancy, but enough to keep her busy, enough to make her feel useful. She had one lace wrapper for Sundays and new shoes for church. But what mattered most was peace. When she slept, it was without fear. When she woke, it was without dread. Sometimes she sat in her small veranda and watched the clouds with a calm heart, murmuring gratitude. One morning, Gennara called. Her voice was low. "Mummy, there's a patient who reminds me of someone." Adan leaned closer to the phone. "How do you mean?" "His name is Ina," she said. "He collapsed near OG Junction. No ID. Nothing on him. I only remember you once said our father's name was Ina." The silence on the line stretched. Adan's hands trembled. "What hospital?" "St. Teresa's," Gennara answered. "Enugu." Adane did not reply immediately. She ended the call quietly, stared at the floor for a long time, then packed a small bag and left the house. At the hospital, Gennara was surprised to see her mother walking into the reception. "You didn't tell me you were coming." "Take me to him," Adan said. "Are you sure?" Gennara asked. "I need to see." The hallway was quiet, filled with the faint hum of machines and the scent of antiseptic. At bed 16, Ina sat upright, thinner than ever, eating rice with trembling hands. Gennara pulled the curtain gently. Adan stood still. Ina looked up, dropped the spoon, and froze. He blinked. His eyes widened. "Adane," he whispered. Her face did not change. Gennara turned to her. "Mummy, you know him?" Adan nodded slowly. "This is your father." Gennara's lips parted. She stared at the man in the bed, this fragile frame of regrets and dust, and said nothing. Ina tried to rise, but his legs failed him. He slumped. "I didn't know," he muttered. "I didn't recognize." Gennara shook her head. "You didn't need to," she said. "We made it without you." Then she walked out. Adane stepped forward and stood beside him. "Do you remember what the midwife told you?" she asked. "That our daughters were born under a rare sign, that if you embraced them, favor would follow you." Ina blinked, unable to speak. "You chose pride," she said, "and now you have nothing." She turned and walked out of the ward, leaving behind the man who once left her holding 3 newborns at a compound gate. That night, Gennara sat beside her mother, both silent. "Did you forgive him?" she asked. "Not for him," Adan replied. "For myself. Hate is heavy. We cannot carry it where we are going." Gennara nodded slowly. He asked if he could see us again. "That is your choice," Adan said. "But remember, mercy does not require reunion." In another ward, Ina lay with tears soaking his pillow, whispering names he never got to use. The world had turned. His daughters had risen. And he, the man who once said they were nothing, now knew the full weight of what he had thrown away. In the days that followed, silence settled over everything. Gennara continued her hospital rounds, but each time she passed bed 16, her steps slowed, her eyes lingered. Ina had stopped trying to speak when she entered. He watched her with quiet reverence, unsure if he was allowed to hope. In his corner of the ward, he kept the cup of water she gave him the first night like a sacred thing. The nurses began whispering about how different she was with him, gentler, more deliberate, like something deep and personal held her in place, but Chainara was careful. She gave no hints to anyone. In her heart, she was a storm of emotion, a girl who had grown up without, now face to face with the man who abandoned her. It wasn't hate. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was a hollow recognition that the stranger in the bed was also the man whose shadow had stretched across her childhood, and that was its own kind of wound. Back in Umais, Chinyeri and Chisholm returned for a short visit. Adane had said nothing to them yet. They came with suitcases, new shoes, and stories of their lives. Chinyer now worked remotely for 2 different international clients. She had built a payment app for farmers that was being piloted in Lagos. Chisholm had received a job offer in Abuja with a construction firm building eco-friendly homes. The kitchen filled with their voices again. Laughter returned to the yard, and for a few days it felt like they were little girls once more, sleeping beside each other, whispering jokes in the dark. But even joy could not erase what loomed unspoken. On the 3rd night, Adan called them to the sitting mat under the mango tree. They sat cross-legged, holding cups of warm millet drink, their eyes reflecting the low light of the single bulb hanging from a nail. "There's something I must tell you," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, but the stillness in her tone made the air heavy. "Your sister met your father." Both girls froze. Chinyeri lowered her cup. Chisholm's eyes narrowed slightly. "He's in the hospital in Enugu," Adan continued. "He collapsed on the road. He's not well." "And?" Chinyeri asked. "He didn't recognize her," Adan said. "Of course he didn't," Chisholm muttered. "He never tried to know us." They were quiet for a long time. Then Chisholm asked, "What does he want?" "I don't know," Adan replied. "Maybe nothing. Maybe just to see your faces again." "He saw us once," Chinyeri said. "At birth, that was enough for him." Adani nodded. "I'm not telling Tolan you to go. I only want you to know the truth. What you do with it is yours to decide." The next morning, they packed a few items and left without saying where they were going. Adane knew they were headed to Enugu. She did not stop them. Some things must be faced to be understood. At the hospital, the 3 sisters stood outside Ward 16. Chinyeri walked in first. Ina was sitting upright, reading a faded newspaper. He looked up and his hands trembled. Chisholm followed, taller now, standing like the pillar she had become. Janara entered last, quiet as ever. Ina's eyes darted between them. "You came," he said. "You're all here." "You don't deserve us," Chisholm said calmly. "But we came anyway." Ina nodded, unable to speak. His eyes filled with tears, his throat clenched. "I am sorry," he whispered, "not for what I lost, for what you had to suffer, for what your mother endured." Chinyeri stepped forward. "We are not here for apologies. We came to look into your face, to see if time had changed it, to see if regret had softened you." He nodded. "It has," he said, "but too late." "Yes," she replied, "too late." They didn't stay long. Before leaving, Chainara placed a small envelope on his bedside table. "You'll be transferred to a care center tomorrow," she said. "This will help cover your needs." He didn't touch the envelope. "Why would you do this?" he asked. "Because our mother taught us to give dignity to others, even when it was not given to us," Chisholm said. That is her legacy, not yours." They left without another word. Ina sat in the dim light, holding the envelope but not opening it. Inside was a sum he hadn't seen in years, and a note that read, "We are not broken." We rose. That evening, the nurses moved him to the city care home. It was modest, but clean. The staff were kind. The meals were warm. Every so often, he would ask the nurse for more paper and sit by the window, trying to write letters he would never send. Letters that began with, "I was afraid," or "I was wrong," or "Thank you for surviving." Weeks passed. The triplets returned to their lives, to jobs and dreams that stretched beyond their beginnings. They rarely spoke of their father again, not out of hate, but out of acceptance. What was done could not be undone. But they had chosen not to carry it like a curse. Instead, they carried each other. Every payday they sent something home to Adan, a new fridge, a lace wrapper, money for the well, not because she asked, but because they remembered the nights she went hungry so they wouldn't. They never said it aloud, but each of them knew. They were only standing tall because she had knelt for years to lift them up. One Sunday morning, Adan sat on the front steps of her house peeling yams. A neighbor passed by and said, "Mama Doctor, your daughters are doing wonders." She smiled faintly. "They are God's reply," she said. Later that week, a local NGO asked to interview her for Women's Day. They wanted to know her secret. She said, "I have no secret. I just did not give up." The interviewer asked if she was angry with her past. She said, "If I was, I would have missed my future." The video of her interview went viral. Women from across the region came to visit, to thank her, to call her Mama Strength. She never sought fame, but her story became a lamp for others. And somewhere in the care home, an old man watched her video on a cracked tablet, tears sliding down his cheeks. He watched her eyes, her voice, her calm power. He paused the video and whispered, "I had no idea." The day Adan received the invitation, the sun was only just rising over Umais. A white envelope lay on her doorstep with an official seal and her name written in clean script. She opened it slowly, fingers careful as though touching something sacred. Inside was an invitation to attend a national recognition ceremony in Abuja, celebrating women who had raised families against extraordinary odds. Her daughters had nominated her without telling her. The letter said all travel and accommodations would be covered. She read it twice before she let herself smile. When she told the girls later that evening, they laughed like children. "About time," Chisom said, lifting her mother's hand. "We've always known who the real hero is." Chinara booked the tickets. Chenyer bought her a new wrapper set in soft gold and deep blue. They took turns coaching her on what to say if she was interviewed, but she only said, "I'll speak from my heart. That's all I know how to do." In Abuja, the hall was filled with lights and music. Adan stood near the front row, wrapped in her new cloth, her gray hair tied in a neat bun. Her daughters flanked her, each radiant in their own way. Chinara in her white medical blazer, Chisom in a smart suit, Chinyer in an elegant dress with a silver laptop bag. When Adan's name was called, the applause shook the walls. She walked to the podium slowly but with steady steps. When she reached the microphone, she looked at the audience for a long moment. "I am not here because I was strong," she began. "I am here because love refused to break." The hall went silent. She spoke of nights with no food, of walking for hours with 3 babies tied to her back, of selling a kara to buy books, of teaching her girls never to beg for respect but to earn it through dignity and knowledge. She spoke of the mistake someone made when they thought 3 girls were not enough. When she finished, the crowd rose. The president's wife handed her the plaque, but it was her daughters who held her arms on the way back down. The next day, newspapers ran headlines. Woman who raised 3 stars after husband abandoned her receives national honor. Blogs and radio stations spoke her name. She didn't care for attention, but she smiled when the village headman came to her door with a bouquet and a public thank you. Even more touching, girls from the local school began stopping by her shop, asking for advice, sitting quietly to listen to her speak about persistence. She never gave them long speeches, just simple truths. Don't fear being overlooked. Grow in silence. Then bloom. Meanwhile, at the care home in Enugu, Ina watched the footage alone in the common room. No one else knew she was his wife. No one knew the triplets on the screen were his daughters. He said nothing. He simply watched and rewatched, his eyes lingering on the way Adan smiled, the way Chinyere held her mother's hand, the way Chisholm looked like she could rebuild the world from scraps. He wept quietly, not because he wanted their success, but because he now understood he had forfeited something eternal. One of the nurses asked if he was okay. He nodded, wiped his face, and whispered, "I am grateful they made it." Months passed, life found its rhythm again. Chinara received an offer to train in South Africa under a prestigious fellowship. Chisholm moved to Nairobi to supervise a green housing project. Chinyere, after building a full software system for a regional health platform, was invited to a tech summit in Germany. The daughters called Adan every week. She told them not to worry, that the shop was doing well, that she had even begun teaching 2 neighbor girls how to make soap to sell. But one night, alone under the stars, she looked at her old Bible and thought of Ina. She had not seen him since that day at the hospital. She did not hate him. But she had built a new life where he was no longer part of the walls. Still, she prayed for him that night. Not out of love, but from a quiet place in her soul where wounds had become wisdom. Ina's health declined slowly. His legs gave out first, then his voice. The care home staff noted he no longer asked for anything. He only stared out the window and sometimes hummed lullabies no one recognized. One morning they found a note tucked under his pillow. It was addressed to my daughters. Inside were shaky words. "I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I pray that every day you walk in light. You were never the mistake. I was." The staff called Chinara. She read the note without speaking. She told the nurse to keep it in his file. He died a few days later. No dramatic moment, no final speech, just the quiet exhale of the man whose life had taught him too late what mattered. The hospital called Chinara again. She agreed to pay for a simple burial. No one else came. She didn't go either. She just said, "Bury him with dignity." On the anniversary of the national award, the triplets returned home. They cooked for their mother, swept the compound, and retold old stories. That night, under the same mango tree, they sat and asked her one question. "What do you want now, Mummy?" Adan looked at each of them. "Nothing more," she said. "I only wanted to see you all standing." Chinyere leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "We're still climbing," she said. "We haven't reached the top." Adani nodded. "Then keep climbing, but always remember the ground you came from and build steps for others." And that became the legacy. The triplets founded a girls' empowerment scholarship called the Adan Foundation. It offered education to daughters of single mothers, training in tech, science, and health. They gave talks, wrote essays, and returned home every year to host village workshops. They never mentioned their father, not because they erased him, but because they had learned to build without bitterness. In the last years of her life, Diane never grew sick. She aged gently, like the soft setting of the sun. On her final birthday, the village women sang for her. The triplets surrounded her with gifts. When she blew out the candle, she said, "Let every girl know she is enough." And that became the line printed at the entrance of the school built in her honor a year after she passed. The Adani Memorial School for Girls opened its doors in Umays, with its first students writing essays about courage, sacrifice, and the power of a mother's love. And, far away, somewhere in a dusty hospital file drawer in Enugu, a note remains, fragile, faded, signed by a man who once chose pride, but who in his final moments finally understood the weight of a woman's strength.